January 1942. The night sky over Detroit glows faintly orange, not from fire but from furnaces. Steam hisses from the ground as men and women in heavy coats walk through snow toward the gates of a factory that never sleeps. Inside, conveyor belts roar. Sparks rain from welding torches. Machines once built for cars now birth the bodies of warplanes. Thousands of workers move in rhythm, faces streaked with oil, eyes focused on metal that will soon take flight. Above the noise, a foreman's whistle cuts through. Another fuselage complete, another engine tested, another bomber born. Across the Atlantic in occupied Europe, German officers still laugh at American industry. Soft, they say, too slow, too distracted by comfort. But inside these vast steel cathedrals, something unstoppable is awakening. Rivet by rivet, America is transforming from a sleeping giant into an industrial storm. And soon those same factories the Germans mocked will be producing a plane every 5 minutes. In the late 1930s, the world stood on the edge of transformation, not yet by bombs or tanks, but by machines and minds. Germany's factories, tightly controlled under Hitler's 4-year plan, were already tuned for war. The Reich's industrial rhythm was precise, militarized, and ruthless. Mercedes, Messerschmitt, Krupp, and Heinkel, names that had once built for prestige, now forged engines of conquest. Across the Atlantic, America seemed frozen in another era. The Great Depression still haunted its streets. Production lines had slowed, warehouses sat idle, and the hunger for consumer goods barely stirred. The U.S. Army ranked 17th in the world, smaller than that of Portugal, and in Berlin such numbers fed a dangerous illusion. German officers saw America as a land of jazz, advertisements, and soft hands. "They build toys," sneered one German industrial officer in 1938, "while we build destiny." Propaganda films mocked the clumsy American assembly line, showing cartoonish workers dropping wrenches and missing bolts. Even Hitler in private believed that the United States was too materialistic, too divided, too pampered to sustain a war economy. Yet beneath the surface of that arrogance, a silent power waited. In cities like Detroit, Chicago, and Buffalo, the infrastructure of a new kind of warfare already existed, just disguised as peacetime commerce. The automobile industry, designed for speed, precision, and mass output, was the sleeping core of what would become the greatest industrial surge in human history. But in 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, America was not ready. The Neutrality Act still restricted arms sales. Many Americans, scarred by the First World War, swore never to be dragged into another European conflict. Factories that could have built tanks were still making cars, refrigerators, and radios. Across the Atlantic, Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg stunned the world, not only through its tactics but through the visible proof of German industrial might. Planes darkened the skies over Warsaw and Rotterdam. Columns of tanks rolled faster than armies could retreat. German officers proudly called it a triumph of industry. British intelligence studying German efficiency worried deeply. Could the democracies ever catch up? In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched closely. He understood something most of his rivals didn't, that wars were no longer won only by soldiers but by machines. In one radio address months before Pearl Harbor, he warned, "We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself." Still, in 1940, America's factories were scattered, uncoordinated, and bound by corporate rivalries. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler dominated automobiles, but had little interest in military production. Executives feared that retooling would destroy profits. Engineers hesitated, uncertain how to turn assembly lines for sedans into lines for bombers. Meanwhile, in Germany, Albert Speer and Hermann Göring accelerated weapon output with terrifying efficiency. Between 1939 and 1941, the Luftwaffe expanded to more than 10,000 operational aircraft. The message to the Allies was clear. The Axis could outproduce and outfight them before they even began. And so the laughter continued. Even the Japanese military attaché in Berlin wrote home that American industry was fragmented and undisciplined. Few in the Axis believed the U.S. would mobilize before defeat arrived, but something was beginning to stir in those same fragmented factories. In 1940, Britain, desperate and bombed nightly, turned to America for help. Contracts began arriving for aircraft and engines. The factories of California and Michigan received new blueprints stamped with the Royal Air Force insignia. For the first time, car manufacturers began building aircraft parts, Ford engineers studied British Spitfire and Hurricane designs. North American Aviation, once a small company, rushed to develop a fighter that could meet British orders. The prototype that would soon become the P-51 Mustang. It was the start of an industrial awakening. Still hesitant, still unsure, but moving. The laughter in Berlin was getting louder, but so was the hum of machinery in Detroit. And soon the sparks of these early contracts would ignite a transformation so massive that even Hitler's most confident engineers could not have imagined its scale. Because before America could build a plane every 5 minutes, it first had to learn how to build for war. December 7, 1941. A quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii erupts into fire. Within hours, the news spreads across the United States. Battleships burning, hundreds dead, the Pacific Fleet crippled. But beyond grief and rage, something else ignites in that moment. Purpose. The next day, President Roosevelt's voice echoes through Congress. A date which will live in infamy, he declares. And with those words, the era of neutrality ends. The entire nation, once hesitant and divided, now turns as one toward war. Factories that once made comfort now prepare for conflict. The War Production Board is formed within weeks, led by industrialist Donald Nelson and supervised by men who understand machines better than politics. Their mission is simple but staggering. Convert every American factory into a weapon of war. Suddenly, sewing machine plants are ordered to make rifle parts. Typewriter companies build machine guns. The piano industry is asked to craft wooden components for gliders. Every sector, from cosmetics to construction, is pulled into the vortex of total war. In Detroit, the auto capital of the world, the transformation is seismic. Henry Ford's engineers dismantle entire assembly lines to study how a bomber might flow through production as easily as a Model T once did. General Motors allocates its plants to produce tanks, aircraft engines, and artillery. By 1942, more than 75% of all U.S. car production has stopped, replaced by military contracts. The people follow the machines. Men who once built sedans now rivet wings. Women, in uniforms of denim and determination, step onto factory floors in record numbers. They become the unseen soldiers of industry. Rosie the Riveter is not just propaganda. She is the symbol of a workforce reborn. From dawn to dusk and often through the night, the sound of hammers and engines fills the air across the nation. The factory becomes a battlefield, its weapon output. In Washington, Roosevelt issues the most ambitious production order in human history. 50,000 planes, and fast. The room falls silent when he says it. Even his closest advisors whisper that the number is impossible. But Roosevelt doesn't blink. He understands the psychology of ambition. To win a war of machines, you must aim beyond imagination. And America does. The War Production Board centralizes resources: steel, copper, aluminum, rubber. Civilian goods are rationed. Factories no longer compete. They collaborate. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, Boeing, and Lockheed work under a single industrial strategy. Engineers share blueprints. Assembly secrets are no longer proprietary. They are patriotic. Willow Run, Michigan becomes the epicenter of this revolution. In 1942, construction begins on what will soon be the largest factory in the world, a 3.5 million square foot facility designed to produce B-24 Liberator bombers on a continuous assembly line. Skeptics mock the idea. You can't mass-produce bombers like cars, they say. But Ford's engineers think otherwise. The blueprint of Willow Run looks like a dare, a mile-long line of machines, cranes, and humans working in perfect rhythm. Every window pane, every conveyor angle is measured for efficiency. When production begins, each plane moves slowly across the floor. Wings, fuselage, engines, guns, until, by the end of the line, a fully assembled bomber rolls out ready for war. At first, the process falters. Delays, shortages, coordination issues. Critics call it a fantasy. But Ford's teams adjust, refine, and accelerate. Within months, Willow Run begins producing bombers faster than any facility in history. By mid-1943, the United States is no longer an underdog. It is an industrial empire in motion. Each month, more planes rise from American soil than Germany and Japan combined can replace. The Luftwaffe, once masters of the sky, begin to feel the pressure. Factories in California, Texas, and Ohio join the rhythm. Boeing's Seattle lines build the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress. North American Aviation refines the P-51 Mustang. Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach assembles fleets of C-47 transports. Every hour counts. Every rivet means another chance for victory. The Germans, once amused, start to doubt. Intelligence reports trickle in, staggering numbers that seem impossible. But they're real. What began as laughter is now turning into disbelief. And as America's industrial symphony builds toward its crescendo, one truth becomes undeniable. This war will not be decided by who has the best tank or plane, but by who can build more of them, faster and longer. The arsenal of democracy has awakened, and it is only beginning to roar. The miracle of American production wasn't born from machines alone. It came from the people who built, led, and believed in them, an alliance of engineers, workers, and visionaries who refused to accept the limits of what industry could do. Before the war, an aircraft was handcrafted, slow, delicate, built in small batches by specialists. It took weeks, sometimes months, to complete one. But when America committed to total war, the rules of production changed. Engineers didn't just speed up the process, they reinvented it. Ford's assembly line genius was applied to aviation, a field once thought too complex for such automation. The problem was scale. A car had 15,000 parts, but a bomber had over 1/500,000. To meet that challenge, factories became laboratories of innovation. Jigs, fixtures, and modular subassemblies allowed multiple teams to work on different sections of a plane simultaneously. Conveyor systems moved entire fuselages between departments. Standardization replaced improvisation. Every bolt had a number, every part a duplicate somewhere else. At Willow Run, engineers introduced progressive assembly. The plane literally moved as it was built. It began at the tail and advanced slowly toward the exit, where its nose and engines were fitted last. For the first time in history, an airplane could be produced like an automobile. The results were staggering. Production times collapsed from months to days. The cost of aircraft plummeted. Factories once thought too small to matter now delivered entire wings, propellers, or engines on strict timetables. The chaos of industry had become choreography. But even the most perfect machines needed human hands. Millions of them. By 1943, over 18 million workers were employed in war production, including more than 6 million women who had never worked industrial jobs before. They arrived from every corner of America. Farmers' daughters from Kansas, coal miners' wives from Pennsylvania, immigrants from Italy and Poland, African Americans from the South seeking opportunity in northern plants. Inside the factories, they learned faster than anyone expected. Women mastered riveting, welding, and engine calibration. Posters of Rosie the Riveter hung above break rooms as both inspiration and quiet defiance. The symbol wasn't about propaganda. It was about pride. Shifts were relentless. The air smelled of oil and aluminum dust. Machines thundered through the night. Yet, despite exhaustion, absenteeism was almost non-existent. We knew why we were there, one worker later recalled. Every plane meant fewer sons dying overseas. Outside, the landscape changed too. Entire cities were reborn as factory towns. Schools converted classrooms into drafting spaces. Churches organized volunteer childcare for night shift mothers. Cafeterias served tens of thousands of meals a day. It was as if America had become one vast, synchronized organism, all beating toward the same industrial pulse. The human cost was real, injuries, fatigue, and constant pressure. But the unity was stronger. The lines blurred between genders, races, and classes, if only for those years, in pursuit of one purpose: victory through production. At the center of it all stood leaders who turned belief into action. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was the architect of the vision, but it took industrial generals to execute it. One of the most critical figures was William S. Knudsen, a Danish-born executive from General Motors. In 1940, Roosevelt personally called him to Washington and said, "You know production. America needs you." Knudsen left his $1 million salary and took a government job for $1 a year. Knudsen coordinated thousands of contracts, cutting through red tape and forcing competitors to cooperate. His strategy was clear: simplify, standardize, and expand. He transformed aircraft design into something producible on a national scale. Then came Henry Ford, the pioneer of the moving assembly line. His vision for Willow Run was radical: a single factory that could build a complete bomber from rivet to runway. Many said it couldn't be done. Ford replied, "We build 8 million cars before breakfast." Others followed. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production genius known as Cast Iron Charlie, who personally supervised Willow Run's layout. Donald Nelson of the War Production Board, who managed the flow of materials across thousands of companies, and men like Glenn L. Martin and Donald Douglas, who scaled up aircraft engineering to levels unseen before. It was a leadership network unlike anything in history, industrial, not political. These men didn't argue over ideology. They measured progress in output, tonnage, and flight hours, and they knew that time was the real enemy. By 1942, their combined effort was producing more than 10,000 aircraft a month. Each factory became a command post, each assembly line a front line. The laughter that once echoed from Berlin was now being drowned out by the rhythm of pistons, riveters, and roaring engines. The sound of a nation that had discovered its true weapon, production. And as that sound spread across America, another story was unfolding on the other side of the ocean, one of disbelief, intelligence reports, and growing fear. By 1942, German intelligence began receiving reports too absurd to believe. American factories, they said, were producing more aircraft in a month than Germany in a year. At first, Berlin dismissed them as Allied propaganda. Impossible, wrote one Luftwaffe analyst. The Americans build refrigerators, not fighters. But the numbers grew harder to ignore. Photographs from British intelligence showed massive new plants in Michigan and California, buildings larger than entire German towns. Aerial reconnaissance of American coasts revealed shipyards lined with Liberty ships under construction, each completed in mere weeks. In 1943, Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring reportedly slammed his fist on a table after hearing updated figures. "What kind of people are these?" he shouted. "They build aircraft like sausages." What the Germans failed to grasp early on was the nature of scale. Their industry, efficient but rigid, relied on specialized craftsmanship and controlled labor. American production was the opposite, chaotic, decentralized, and powered by freedom. Dozens of companies competed to outproduce each other, sharing ideas, improving designs, and adapting overnight. Where German engineers sought perfection, Americans sought quantity that worked. If a component failed, they didn't halt production. They redesigned it on the line. If an engine lagged, they doubled its output at the next factory. The American war machine evolved in real time. By late 1943, German pilots were encountering endless formations of bombers over Europe. Each one shot down seemed instantly replaced. Luftwaffe veterans described the feeling as hopeless arithmetic. No matter how many were destroyed, more arrived. For the first time, the Reich began to realize they weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an economy. Strategy in war had always been defined by tactics, geography, and courage. But in World War II, it shifted towards something far colder: mathematics. In 1942, American generals calculated that the key to victory was not superiority per plane, but saturation per mission. They didn't need to outfly the Germans. They needed to outbuild them. Factories became the new front lines. Each bomber produced was another strike on German industry. Each tank another blow to the Eastern Front. The ability to maintain an unbroken flow of replacement machines became as vital as any battle plan. The result was logistical supremacy. America could fight across two oceans because it could manufacture two wars at once. While Germany fought under constant bombardment, the U.S. mainland never faced a single raid. Its supply chains stretched unbroken from the iron mines of Minnesota to the runways of England. Railways thundered with boxcars of engines, guns, and fuel. Every week, Liberty ships sailed from New York and San Francisco carrying thousands of crates stamped, "Made in USA, War Department." Even the Allies marveled. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill admitted privately that without American production, we would have been stripped bare within 6 months. The Luftwaffe, once the symbol of German dominance, was now overwhelmed not by superior tactics, but by sheer replacement rate. Every B-17 that fell was replaced within days. Every P-51 Mustang that arrived in Europe shifted the balance a little further. By 1944, American industrial strategy was operating like a second army, invisible but decisive. And this strategy didn't just win battles, it suffocated the enemy's will to fight. Yet behind this triumph lay a question that still haunts historians. What happens when war becomes a function of industry? For the first time in history, human effort and mechanical output were fused into one continuous process of destruction. Workers on assembly lines were no longer distant from the battlefield. They were the battlefield, their labor translated into firepower thousands of miles away. There was pride in their purpose, yes, but also unease. Newspapers spoke of victory through machinery. Propaganda films glorified the endless production lines as symbols of strength. Yet some voices quietly wondered if something vital was being lost. Could humanity survive its own efficiency? For the Germans, the moral reckoning was darker still. Their factories, driven by desperation, turned increasingly to forced labor. Millions of prisoners and civilians under brutal control. America's production was powered by freedom, Germany's by fear. The contrast could not have been starker. Still, the moral burden was shared. The bombers built in American plants would soon rain fire over Europe's cities, Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, targeting the very industrial centers that had once laughed at American weakness. The irony was chilling. The same efficiency that had mocked the U.S. now brought destruction upon Germany. By late 1944, even some American factory workers expressed a strange, distant sorrow. "We built them fast," one woman recalled decades later, "but we knew what they did." The war had proven that industrial power could save the free world, but it had also proven that once unleashed, it could never fully be contained. And as 1943 turned to 1944, this moral and mechanical engine reached its breaking point, the moment when production became not just power, but destiny. The skies over Germany, 1943. A pale dawn breaks through heavy clouds above the Ruhr Valley. Far below, the smokestacks of steelworks and chemical plants stand like black fingers reaching for the sky. And then, faintly at first, the low thunder begins. Engines. Hundreds of them. What the Germans once mocked as impossible is now visible on the horizon. Endless formations of American bombers stretching from one edge of the sky to the other. The arsenal of democracy has taken flight. Each B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator that appears over Germany is not just a plane. It is the embodiment of thousands of workers, engineers and factories synchronized into one mechanical heartbeat. They arrive in such numbers that radar operators can no longer count them. One German officer later wrote, "It was like a moving city of metal." This is the moment when American industry turns from potential into power. The command center at Ford's Willow Run plant had once hung a simple sign above its production line: "The bomber wins the war." By mid-1943, that slogan feels prophetic. Every hour, another B-24 rolls off the line, a massive four-engine bomber capable of carrying 5 tons of explosives. The assembly process is now a masterpiece of precision. Aluminum sheets stamped in Chicago arrive by rail and are riveted in Michigan. Turrets built in New Jersey arrive perfectly on schedule. Engines from Pratt & Whitney factories in Connecticut slide into position like puzzle pieces. The orchestration is so smooth it feels more like a symphony than an industry. In the beginning, Willow Run struggled to produce even one bomber a day. But now it builds one every 63 minutes. By 1944, over 8,600 B-24 bombers have rolled out of that single plant. More aircraft than some entire nations produced during the war. The sight of so many bombers taking off daily becomes almost surreal. From the ground, the sky seems to vibrate. Each wave that crosses the English Channel represents America's factories in motion. Behind every plane, hundreds of thousands of parts flow through invisible supply chains. Aluminum from Minnesota, rubber from Ohio, glass from Pennsylvania, copper from Arizona. The logistical web is so vast that any single break could stall the entire effort. But it doesn't. German engineers, trained in perfectionism, cannot comprehend it. How could a nation produce so many aircraft, each with such complexity, and still maintain function and quality? But the truth is simple: adaptability. American industry thrives on constant improvement. If a process fails, it's replaced overnight. If a part malfunctions, 1,000 more are built better. And above Germany, the results are devastating. In August 1943, the Allies launch Operation Tidal Wave, a massive air raid on the oil refineries of Ploiești, Romania, one of the Third Reich's vital fuel sources. Hundreds of bombers thunder across enemy territory. Many are lost, but the flow doesn't stop. The next day, new bombers take their place. By late 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force begins its relentless campaign against Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr, Hamburg, Schweinfurt, Regensburg. The goal is simple: crush the machine that Hitler built. Factories that once mocked American softness are now buried under the weight of bombs built by American hands. Each impact is the echo of a rivet, a shift, a night of work somewhere in Detroit or Los Angeles. But the cost is immense. The air war over Europe is brutal. Thousands of American crews never return. The loss rate in 1943 missions often exceeds 20%. For every bomber that falls, 10 more must replace it. And they do. The assembly lines never stop. In Germany, the psychological shift is visible. Civilians stare at the sky in disbelief. Entire cities darken their lights, but the bombers find them anyway. The sound of engines becomes a symbol of inevitability. One German civilian later recalled, "We knew the war was lost when the bombers came, and they never stopped coming." Still, the Luftwaffe fights back with desperation. New jet fighters are designed, anti-aircraft guns roar, and pilots like Adolf Galland push their squadrons to the limit. But even they know the truth. The war of attrition cannot be won against a nation that can build faster than it can be destroyed. By early 1944, the Allies hold air supremacy over Western Europe. The industrial balance has tipped irrevocably. Every 5 minutes, somewhere in America, another aircraft leaves a factory floor. Every 5 minutes, another shadow crosses the Atlantic to join the swarm. And for the first time, the German High Command begins to realize they are no longer fighting an enemy. They are being buried by one. The machine that was once underestimated has become the deciding force of the war. But the story is not finished yet. The next stage will show how that unstoppable rhythm, that industrial thunder, directly reshaped the outcome of the war on the ground. June 6, 1944, dawn over the English Channel. The sea is restless, the air thick with mist and movement. Thousands of ships stretch to the horizon, packed with men, tanks, trucks, and weapons of every shape and size. Above them, the sky hums with the sound of engines, the same deep, rhythmic thunder that Germany once dismissed as American mass production. But now that very mass production is coming ashore. D-Day, Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. The scale is staggering. Nearly 7,000 vessels, 11,000 aircraft, and over 156,000 Allied soldiers in a single day. It is not only a triumph of courage, it is a triumph of logistics. Every bullet, every jeep, every crate of rations that hits the sand of Normandy represents the industrial pulse of a nation working 24 hours a day across an ocean. The invasion force consumes 5 million gallons of fuel daily, yet it never runs dry. The supply lines from America flow like arteries feeding a living giant, unbroken, relentless. And when the skies open, they do so with terrifying precision. Above the beaches, waves of Allied bombers pound the German defenses, thousands of them flying in perfect formation. The roar of B-17s and B-24s fills the clouds as the steel storm begins. Bridges, rail lines, and bunkers vanish beneath tons of explosives. For the soldiers below, it's both awe and salvation. One paratrooper later said, "It felt like the sky itself was fighting for us." The war that began with disbelief in America's capabilities now turns on the very force Germany said could never exist. Behind every Allied success lies a vast industrial miracle. When a Sherman tank rolls off a landing craft in Normandy, it's not just a machine. It's a symbol of how flexible and fast the American system has become. Factories that once built cars now roll out tanks by the hour. By mid-1944, the United States is producing 40,000 tanks a year, 100,000 aircraft, and over 2 million trucks. The German generals, who once boasted of superior design, now face a nightmare of numbers they cannot match. One American general summed it up bluntly: "Quantity has a quality all its own." As the Allies push inland, the logistical genius of American industry keeps them moving. Fuel depots are built on the beaches. Temporary harbors, mulberries, rise from the sea within days, allowing entire divisions to be resupplied directly from ships. Engineers construct pipelines under the ocean, pumping fuel from England to France. Everywhere the U.S. Army goes, its factories follow. Mobile workshops, repair depots, field kitchens, even portable hospitals. It's as if a piece of America itself is marching across Europe. Meanwhile, in the skies above, air power becomes absolute. The once fearsome Luftwaffe is broken. German pilots climb into cockpits knowing they may never return. American bombers roam the skies unchallenged, escorted by P-51 Mustangs with their distinctive long-range tanks. A small innovation that changes everything. Now bombers can reach Berlin and back. No city, no factory, no supply line in the Reich is safe. Railways collapse. Oil reserves vanish. German tanks stall for lack of fuel. Even the mighty Tiger and Panther tanks, once symbols of technological superiority, sit abandoned, their engines silent. On the ground, Allied divisions advance like clockwork, supported by an endless stream of replacements and material. When a jeep breaks down, another takes its place within hours. When a bridge is destroyed, combat engineers rebuild it overnight. For every obstacle, the solution already exists, planned, packed, and shipped months earlier from a factory floor somewhere in America. By early 1945, the industrial tide is overwhelming. American bombers darken the sky above the Rhine. The once mighty German war machine is now a skeleton, brilliant in design but starved, exhausted, and cut off. Civilians huddle in cellars as the earth trembles. The sound of distant engines, once mocked as crude and mechanical, now feels like the footsteps of destiny. When the Allies cross the Rhine in March 1945, the end is already written. The Reich that built its empire on precision has been destroyed by mass coordination, by the ability to produce, move, and sustain beyond human limits. And as American troops liberate the camps, capture the factories, and enter the ruins of once mighty German cities, one fact becomes undeniable. The war was not just won by soldiers, and it was won by workers. Welders, engineers, and assembly lines that refused to stop. Factories like Willow Run, once filled with smoke and steel, had quietly rewritten history. For every rivet, there was a victory. For every shift, a step closer to peace. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the world understood a new truth. Wars are no longer decided only by the bravery of men, but by the power of machines and the nations that can build them. The factories are silent now. The riveters have gone home. The great assembly lines that once roared with purpose stand still, their echo drifting through the vast steel halls that once built the wings of victory. But what they left behind is not just machinery. It's a memory and a message. The United States entered the Second World War underestimated, unprepared, and dismissed by enemies who believed industrial power alone could not win a war. Yet it was precisely that, the mastery of production, coordination, and will, that transformed the tide of history. When the war began, America built a few hundred planes a month. By its end, it was building one every 5 minutes. That number alone tells the story. The arsenal of democracy did more than arm soldiers. It reshaped how humanity understood power. It proved that technology and determination, when fused under one purpose, could surpass even the most disciplined military machine. And it forever changed the relationship between industry and warfare. Every modern conflict since Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, Ukraine, carries the echo of that lesson. That logistics, not just strategy, decides survival. For the men and women who lived through it, the memory never faded. They remembered the fatigue of endless shifts, the pride of perfecting a rivet, the silent prayers sent with each plane that left the runway. Many never saw the battlefront, yet their work reached every front line on Earth. Those planes, tanks, and trucks were not just steel. They were hope, carried across oceans. In the end, what Germany once mocked became the engine of its own defeat. What began with laughter ended with surrender. And as peace returned, the same factories that forged the instruments of war turned back to the tools of life. Cars, homes, appliances, and the prosperity of a new era. The hum of American industry did not fade. It only changed tune. The world that followed, globalized, mechanized, interconnected, was born from those wartime assembly lines. Because once a nation learns it can build a plane every 5 minutes, it never sees limits the same way again.